Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, so we have some things in the status. I will name the names in order of appearance. So, Aaron, you are first. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, I didn't catch that, Adrian. What do you want me to do?
We're doing the status thing.
Oh,
So,
so
yeah.
yes, I try to run the OCP diag tool on one of our nodes. Got some dependency bits that I'm now trying to understand and hopefully get that working. So, and I also am looking for slides if they're available, because a lot of the conference, at least the two that we are going to, it'd be a good idea to have, if they're available, those slides inserted into the deck for the October talks.
Yeah, go down.
I did have some slides that I made. They're not the copy that you guys got last week. They were sort of aimed at the SSD work, but you're certainly welcome to take them. I think a couple of them are kind of generic, and I'll get them over to you. I'll add them to the meeting notes right after this.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Aaron. Next up, Paul, do you wanna talk about the changes to PCI crawler?
Yes, the long-awaited thing that people been waiting for. It's the pull request is there. Thank you for adding it. Please go check it out, and it takes in the JSON file as requested. And then it will check through all the parameters that is in it to make sure they match and spit out a bunch of OCP output. So tested it on my virtual machine, seems to be working fine, although my virtual machine isn't exactly behaving itself because some of the devices data seem to be empty for like location and things like that, but it's all virtual devices anyway, so it's probably why it's misbehaving. So it would be good if someone can take this and run it on a production unit to make sure. I promise I didn't put any malicious code in it yet. Mr. Frame.
Yeah, I can do that. I apologize, Paul. I haven't gotten a chance to look at your pull request yet, but my question was, you've taken the existing PCI crawler and you wrapped it with the library section. Okay, so all the dependencies,
No.
Nothing new.
No, Dan, it's not wrapped. You just said wrapped. No, this is in the PCI crawler code. It's not a wrapper.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the PCIe crawler code, but it doesn't affect the current functionality of PCIe crawler. It's completely, you have to run it with a separate option in order to do this whole damn thing.
Okay, I think that's okay though, because PCI crawler wasn't changing that frequently anyway, so this seems like the appropriate thing to do.
Go, Satish.
Oh, sorry. So this sounds like a good reference for me for LMT, like if I want to integrate the OCP output into LMT. So is PCI crawler the Python or CPP?
Python.
Okay, sounds good. So Adrian, can you help me like pointing to this repo and how do I?
I'll just drop the thing in. Are you in the Slack chat?
Oh, sorry, what chat?
The Slack chat, or I can just drop in a Zoom chat.
I don't think I'm in the Slack. Okay.
The PR is in the meeting notes. We can talk internally. We can talk on Slack. There's ways.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been working with Paul on that PR, and sorry, Paul, I didn't have time today to look at the iteration, but I will.
I fixed all your bugs or all the things that you were. Yeah, and thanks. I haven't been coding for a while, so it was a good refresher.
Okay, so, thanks for that. Also, sign off your commits. The DCO
they're all signed off. No.
The DCO is still failing. I mean, I'll talk to you later about that.
Is it? I'm pretty sure I signed off, but okay. Maybe
no, it's because you still have commits on the branch which are not signed. That's because that's why it's failing. Like you added commits on top. I'll explain later.
Yeah, no, I know what I say. I'll fix the older ones. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the update. Next is Igor.
Oh, hi everyone. Yeah, so since last week I added one important feature. It's argument forwarding. So now you can run memtester with whatever arguments you want. Also, last time people asked about what versions my DIAG supports. And it would be too boring to manually test it with every version. So I created a Docker image that automatically fetches the required version of memtester from the author's website and compiles it. So it looks like last 3 versions work fine, but the last 4th version has a problem on its own. If you run it even without a DIAG, it would throw a failure for some reason. And even earlier versions, they don't even compile. So I'm not motivated to figure out why they don't compile and why the 4th version throws an error, because we have 3 latest versions that work. But if anybody needs support for earlier versions, just let me know. Also, with that Docker image, I wanted to do some sort of automatic validation, but it looks like we don't have any parsing library for the OCP output. I know it's just JSON, but this JSON forms some sort of object model that would be nice to parse in a library of some sort. So basically right now the validation is manual. So I need to look at the Docker's output and see if it produces proper OCP output. And last thing is I still need to check if everything works with the case when memtester throws a failure. What I did before, I just fed some PCI Express addresses to the memtester so that it produces read errors. But the problem is that on the machine that I used this for, basically the machine dies and I can get only partial output. So I tested it with some sort of synthetic memtester output when it fails. I need to do some sort of fault injection so that I can reliably generate memory failures when I run memtester. Yep, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Igor. I have a couple of comments on what you just said. Fault injection for memory. I think I know a person who has a project related to that. I'll ask them
nice.
to see if, I'll ask them to see if they can join here. They've been here before. It's Anil Agrawal. And for you asked on whether the JSON output is valid or how to validate that it is compliant to the spec.
No, not exactly. I mean, we probably validated the library so that the JSON output is valid. I want to test if the DIAG parses memtester output properly.
So this is the first layer, as it were.
Right,
so
right.
The
Yes.
Lexer YAC layer, right?
Right. Because right now I test it manually. I just observe what it outputs and decide whether it's good or not. Automatic testing would be a lot better. Maybe I'll just parse JSON manually. It's not that hard. But in general, since we are going to have some sort of, what is that called? Test executor, right? It probably needs some library to parse our output.
Okay. All right. I have a comment for that as well. So this week, currently, there's a couple of teams on Meta side that are involved in a hackathon, and I'll talk about the results in next Wednesday because it's still ongoing. But it's very interesting. Like I'm looking forward to seeing some stuff. And one of the projects has an aspect of parsing OCP JSON output. So I want to see if we can actually write that in Python in such a way that we can open source it and then be part of the Python API probably. And then you can use that to parse the JSON output. That
That would
sounds
be
like
very
what
nice.
you want, right?
Yeah, that would be very nice. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of in a design phase. I was thinking about this a couple of weeks ago, more than just that. An idea that was going on through my head is like an event type parser, where you register some callbacks and it says, okay, I've hit a diagnosis message or an error or whatnot, and you then deal with that message.
Right,
Or
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'll have more updates next week. Okay. Thanks for the update, Igor. I don't see any other names on the meeting notes, but I also don't know if everyone got to write something there. So I'll just ask here if anyone else wants to share any status updates. Go done.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions for Igor regarding memtester. For your error insertion, we've got a lot of libraries for that we can use. But my question is right now where you're using the native memtester, the only actual error that you would detect would be a miscompare. You're not going to see anything for like a correctable or uncorrectable because you're not monitoring for that at the moment, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I don't understand how we could use libraries to simulate an error. I think memtester uses devmem to access physical addresses. So it's like kernel level rather than library level.
Yeah, so Intel C scripts, we can actually inject a miscompare, or we can
Okay.
change the memory location. Like you could do it that way, or you could have another program that peeks and pokes the same address, but you would need to do it from kernel space because you would be, basically stomping on their memory addresses. But we should figure out how to do that. And then the other part of your question I had was, I acknowledge your problem about sort of going in and parsing the output of memtester. That's a hard one because even if you did have a test, all you'd really be doing is showing that it's compliant with the parser you already have, right? But I guess my question is for the second layer, as Adrian referred to it, you have taken the JSON that you output, that you generate, and validated against our spec comparator, right? Like if you're using the Python.
I didn't get the question. What about the second layer?
Yeah, so for the JSON coming out of your utility, right, your results with the OCP format, you have run that through our JSON spec validator, right?
No, I haven't run it through any validators. I sort of trusted the library. So I think that the library is validated.
It should be.
It is.
Adrian?
Yeah. Let me jump in. So the library has a CI test right now, which is based on the example code that Dylan wrote for the C++ API, right? But I am not confident that the example covers absolutely every aspect that could be outputted from that. So Dan has a good point here. You should run the validator, which is in the core repo, against the output from memtester. If you want an example for that, if you look at the set diag, I've added a CI action on GitHub, which runs the validator against output there.
I see. So we already have a ready-to-use validator that we can use to validate any diag.
Yeah, so the schema is actually encoded in a JSON schema format, and the validator uses that JSON schema, and you can feed it any output from any diag, and it will tell you if it's valid or not and where it fails if it does.
I see. Yeah, let me look into that. I didn't know that we had such a validator.
Yeah, let me find the link for you. I'll post it in the chat here. Sorry for interrupting, Dan. Go ahead.
No, you hit the same topic I wanted to hit, so we're fine.
Okay. So in the meantime, while I'm looking for that, if this is all for status, then I guess the last time we were left on discussing the collaboration model for the PCI-LMT tool. But before that, one more thing. Marcos, I think I've seen your username on the PCI crawler history in commits. That is your username, correct? No? Okay, that's a bit weird.
I don't think so, unless I've been.
I saw something for a Gen 6 code or something that was being
Yeah,
on.
Martinez Marcos, isn't this your username?
No.
Okay. All right.
No, someone else.
Yeah. So the
Well,
question
actually,
was.
if it's good code, then yes, sure.
Sure, take the credit.
So the thing I'm trying to address is when I moved the repo from Facebook Incubator to OCP, all of the users got lost. So I'm trying to figure out if there are still users that need access to that. So the question is more general. If you need to write access to the PCI crawler repo, let me know and I'll add you. All right. Now we can get to the LMT topic. I think you wanted to say something, Satish. I think you unmuted yourself.
No, I'm just waiting for the topic to come.
Okay. So then the general question that I have is, how do we work out a model to make a reference PCI LMT tool that we can keep under the umbrella of OCP test and validation? Anything goes.
Yeah, I think last time Hua had some proposal. What do you want to repeat, just in case?
Oh, the last time we talked about using the GitHub discussion. I think that's what we've been doing, right? Where we can just offline just discuss there and keep it going. And I think yeah, I responded to your proposal there, and we can keep that discussion going. And then when we reach some good milestone agreement, we can present it to the forum. Right.
Okay.
So this discussion is already started. Sorry, I wasn't aware of this.
I think it's in the GitHub discussion thread, Adrian.
Yeah, I'm looking at PCI-LMT repo, and there is one with RFC output format for OCP integration, but I don't see something specifically for the collaboration model. Or is this the same thing?
Yeah, I
like
think
you wanna aggregate both discussions into that one.
Yeah, I was assuming that's the intention. Well, can you clarify? I also saw that you added a comment in the discussion about the output format. Is that so? Do you want to continue the discussion there, or do you want to have a separate in a different thread?
Yeah, I think I don't see why not using that discussion unless it has limited visibility to others. Or I think everyone should be able to jump in, and we can just post a link in the notes here, and then everyone can take a look if they're interested.
Yeah, it should be visible and public. Anyone can comment, but the link is not obvious right now. So if you have that, we can add it to the meeting notes or on the chat here, or both.
Yeah, I can get it.
So it's discussion 5. Oh, okay, so it is the OCP integration. Okay. Right. So if this is done, what else do we have pending?
So, sorry, I just want to make sure. So the user ID makes stuff work. Is that you who are?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was going to say, we actually are starting to get a corpus of diags here, right? Like we've got memtester, we have SAT, we'll have the LMT tool, we have PCIe crawler. I think this is a good opportunity now for us to get with Arun and basically get all these running cleanly under contest so that we can do the demo for the CI/CD experience center thing. I was going to say, is that on a track at the moment, or is that something we need to discuss?
So you heard Arun's status at the beginning. We are currently working on the SAT one, which so Arun got the pre-built binary from GitHub. And what we have right now is that the pre-built binary depends on some shared libs, which do not match the system that he has. So we're trying to figure that out. But once we get at least one of them working, which in this case is probably the SAT one, then the infra should be ready to run all of the others. And by the way, to add to your list, I'm also waiting for the SSD ones, which are in progress right now. Like they're part of this hackathon I mentioned as well.
Okay, but our contest runner right now, it was using the older format for the OCP output. I'm not aware of anybody updating that, have they?
I probably need to work on that. It's not as relevant because it wasn't parsing all of the possible messages. It's just looking for a couple of them that are important. So like for the actual result, diagnosis, test, step outcome, and all of that. And those haven't changed a whole lot since version 1. So it may actually still work as it is right now. But I will deal with that as a part of the process of making stuff work on the HP machines.
Yeah, and I think what you have is probably okay, as long as we have sort of the validator, because we're not trying to create like an endorsed, parser, for lack of a better word. That'll be up to everybody's test exec. But we do need something just for our own CI/CD, so we can go and run all the diags and make sure everybody's happy on one of our reference machines, whatever that happens to be, whether it's an HP machine or an OCP machine, whatever.
Sorry, Dan, I missed something critical here. Do we have something on the Experience Center already, or was it more of the idea of piggybacking on some of the existing vendors there?
Well, I was actually thinking that the demo that you were doing was with the Experience Center, but I may be wrong. You may be doing it separately with the HP BIOS lab or whatever you guys are calling it. I apologize.
Yeah, no, we are generally demonstrating the CI, but the CI is a lot more than just this piece, right? So I think, like Adrian said, once we get one piece working, we could then expand that. But the key is to at least get something working in the next few weeks, which is what I'm going to try and do. Yeah, so that's something that Adrian and I will be focused on.
Okay, I think it sounds fair. SAT, it's going to have all the dependencies on all the different, kernel versions and everything else since it's lower level. So maybe we could do memtester or PCIe crawler because those should have a lot less dependencies.
PCI crawler is probably a better choice, or LMT actually, because it only depends on some system stuff which should already be installed there.
Yeah, that's only gonna. Well, actually, how old is the server you're running on right now? Is it going to be PCIe Gen 4 or newer?
Oh yeah, it might actually not have the right PCI devices.
Yeah, that's my concern.
I mean, we'll figure something out. The goal of this is to just have an end-to-end showcase of stuff working. Okay. I see a question appeared in the meeting notes. Do you want test validation workshop sync during OCP 14 members? I don't know Who
I
asked
added
this?
I added that. So we're based everywhere, and we're in different companies. So do we want to use the opportunity where there's probably going to be a few of us together in one location to actually sit down in a meeting room and chat? Or are there items we want to talk about?
You mean like a technical chat? I think we were talking about this a while ago.
I'm not even sure what we would want to chat about, but the opportunity is there if we have topics that we want to talk about. Maybe it's the direction we want to take. Maybe it's like sitting down and talking about some of the things that are harder to write out, like what we had recently about LMT. Maybe there's something else that it might be easier to spend half an hour discussing in person.
I see. Well, I guess we can start from knowing who's gonna go to the OCP summit in person. That's a question. If you wanna like announce that in private, that's fine as well.
Do you
we like show of
could
hands.
we could just raise our hands on the chat, or is that how it works?
Works for me. Okay, there's your answer, Karen.
I'm trying to find out where's the raise hands.
and add Arun, who's not finding the button.
Well, to be fair, I wasn't planning to go, but I mean, Karen, if you're flying all the way here, I'll drive up the street, right?
Yeah.
There you go. I figured it out.
Well, I could meet you anywhere else besides the conference as well. It doesn't have to be there. I'm using it as a reason to travel over to that side of the world. So yeah. So there's if there's items that it's worthwhile talking about, I think we should intentionally book out some time. If there isn't, then that's fair enough as well. If everything is working with if there's nothing that's blocked, maybe what we've got is enough. And that's actually a success for our group as well.
Okay, yeah, if we have enough folks, I think it'd be nice if even if we don't get together at this summit, like just have a dinner or something while everybody's here, if you guys are up for that.
Yeah.
Okay. In the meantime, Rajat just joined. You weren't on the call during the status. If you have anything you want to share, updates on the GPU compliance diag, feel free to do so.
Nothing much at the moment. There's one question is about that I got during the demo was about if there's a standardized way in which you expect diags or any tool to push data to a database and be able to query it back. Are we defining a standard around that as well?
No.
Okay,
Well,
that's what I thought. Okay.
We sort of have though, because of the fact that we have the schema in a certain way. If you're going to query it out, it does sort of dictate that your database schema be somewhat in that form, unless you're going to just pull blobs out of it, right?
Yeah, but to be technically correct, Dan, we do not and should not, in my opinion, enforce the storage schema. We have a spec for the transactional output, but if you want to keep that in a database as is, or you want something else, that should be fine and not mandated by the schema. But I do acknowledge your point that the schema for the transactional format can influence what your database schema will be.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I also acknowledge your point, and I think you are correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Rajat, for the updates. And I have a couple of questions that actually came up. Yeah, before I go to that, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, are we done with the LMT issue? Because I want to ask a a couple questions regarding the discussion going on, like a more general question, like how should we map the lane margining kind of result to the OCP format. I think my question is that the lane margining feature defined by the PCI SIG has a lot more detailed information that doesn't really fall into the OCP kind of the measurement series, like a one measurement compared to a validator. I think that's the scheme, the framework of OCP, right? So what's the approach in general? How do we map raw data to the OCP framework? Is my question clear?
I'm trying desperately to raise my hand.
Right. Well, I stumbled upon that as well when I was trying to see how we can map all the information what we have, or what the tool surfaces to the corresponding OCP format. A few of them are measurements where we can attach a validator and say it's good or bad, but few of them are just informational data, so it doesn't have any validation or anything, like LMT capable, for example. If we need to know the device is LMT capable. If it is not, we need to surface it to the upper stack saying, hey, this device cannot even run LMT. So those kind of things. Yeah, sorry, that's my observation as well. Just want to chime in. What was saying is the real problem.
Yeah, I think actually we probably can map it. We've mapped everything. I think probably the best thing to do would be why don't we sit down and just kind of have a session where we get it out on the whiteboard with a few folks who have mapped something into the OCP format. Like for instance, the example you brought up, I would think would be an attribute that we would put on the hardware info about whether or not it supports a particular feature, right?
Right.
So I kind of have a request based on that. If you do set up this session, I don't know who wants to take the action on that. Maybe you, Dan. We should have some permanent artifact out of that, so some diagram or something. And I'm saying this because I have observed during the hackathon that I was mentioning a minute ago that people are having difficulty in interpreting the schema text. And that is to be expected because the schema is overly general, right? Because we want to cover as many things as possible. But this also comes with the downside of being highly interpretable. So this is actually one of the questions that I had noted down. And if you're having this discussion, it would be nice to post it into like an examples documentation somewhere. Specifically, what came up this week was about DUTs. So if the discussion we've had with the GPUs talking through a link between them or client server, that kind of stuff came up. Like if we have the PCI card, or if if we have a cluster of hosts, what is the DUT? Is it like the host? Is it the cluster? What are the hardware components? And for someone who is completely unfamiliar with the schema, arguably it's difficult to figure out what the best usage is out of that. So I think in all of these discussions, following further discussions, we need to extract examples out of them and document that.
No, I think that's fair. I think probably the easiest way to do this is because some of us that are very familiar with the format, we might not as be familiar with the LMT output. So if we could get an example of that in like whatever native form document, and then we can use it as a starting point for the meeting. that might be a good way to go about it. And then we can kind of go through and debate what fields go where and things like that. I think if we all just get into a room with a whiteboard, like it'll be an hour, it'll be gone before we get anything done.
Sounds good. So Dan, if you can set up something, I don't mind coming up to this open whiteboard meeting. Okay. Public can see a few of my friends.
Yeah, I can probably get something together next week. And then if you take the action item to kind of send me what you've got and any fields that might be like ambiguous, maybe just give me like a little dummy guide and or point me to the official documentation and I can go from there.
Sounds good. I will update the RFC proposal discussion and send you the link. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. Another kind of related question in general is that, so I see, okay, two kind of users for, say, just for any test for LMT. Okay, one type is a test developer, test troubleshooter. The other one is test operator, the runner, right? So they want to look at different information. For example, the test runner want to see a failure and the instruction now how to handle that failure, what to do next. But test developer troubleshooter want to see what caused that failure. So those are two different type of auxiliary information. And how can we differentiate them so that they don't mingle, that there's too much noise from one side to the other?
So this, yeah, I have been discussing this with a couple of people about roles that are present in this process, because you can have I'll name some more roles than what you just said. Like there's the test designer that has domain expertise, test writer, test executor, not test executor as in the software, but as in the role for the person, and the ones that you just mentioned. Well, right now we don't have something specifically for that in the spec text. Maybe we should. I'm not sure it kind of relates a lot to the topic of the spec, which is output specification for diagnostics. But I think it is reasonable if you're asking from a technical standpoint, like how do we filter the output from a diag in such a way that is useful for different audiences. We can possibly write some guidance around that. I'll just add one more thing, which is, in my opinion, this is also correlated with the verbosity question that came up before, like log verbosity. In my opinion, the output should always be complete. If you want to add additional filters to it, like I want just the logs that are passing a certain level, or I want just a view that would help me to debug some hardware, then that's a different aspect that is composed on top of the schema. Satish, you're next.
Yeah, I think you covered it, the verbosity. And the other thing, it's based on my previous experience, is like the diagnosis is targeted for test operators. They just need to know that test passed or failed, and all the measurements should be for the like debugging and the next steps and root causing and stuff. That's the overall. That's the way I look at it. Like the diagnosis should have the next step as well. Like, hey, go and swap this component or reset this component. That should be part of the diagnosis message as well. But all the others, measurement and verbosity, those things should be aiding the debug.
Okay, makes sense. Sorry, can I ask one last question? Or Vincent?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly mention that I think you're raising the question of what's the user interface to the output. And I remember, Dan, you had someone on the team do a visualizer, right? And ultimately, this is a question to the framework, the test executive. Everybody will have a visualization. Maybe there's a question on whether that visualizer becomes part of the diag repo. Right now, I don't think that's the direction we're taking, but I know we'll be building a visualization renderer for the test output that will allow every role to look at different fields.
Yeah, why don't we do that? We do have the visualizer, but it does the OCP 1.0 format, not the current one. I can ask Roni to kind of update it. And for the folks that aren't familiar with the tool, all it does is create like a nice, pretty HTML view for you. There's no web server or anything. It just creates like a standard HTML page where everything's all jammed into one .html file, all the JSON, all the everything. So it's portable. All the JavaScript code to do the rendering and everything is all dropped in there, so you can send it to people via email and things like that. So I'll see if Roni can get that on his roadmap. And then it seems like it would probably go, Adrian, in the same place that we have the validator and things like that, because it's not really tied to any particular implementation of the library. It just renders the output.
Yeah, sounds to me like this is a core thing.
Yeah. But not core Python or core C++ or whatever we call it.
No, core OCP diag core.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Mo.
Sorry, one last question. I'm not familiar with the whole scheme. So it looks like the OCP only specify the output format, right? It doesn't really have a standardization of how to configure the test, how to run the test. Okay, supposedly, I'm not saying we're gonna do this, but supposedly that we can have multiple implementation of the LMT tool that spit out the standardized output, and which can potentially take different configuration. Is that something we're open to do? Like, for example, in the future, anyone can implement their own LMT and plug in and use the same output into the OCP framework. Is that something we want to open to the public?
I'm going to take a stab at this. The start of your question seemed like, should we standardize the input and parameter format? But then you ended up with something else. What was the intention of the question?
No, I'm just saying that where do we leave the freedom, like for user or any developer? Where do we want to, kind of standardize and have everyone conform to?
Yeah, I would say that right now we have the standard on the output. Invariably, there's no way to do this without getting some type of standard on the input eventually. But I think those are the only two things that we'll ever try to make part of the specification, right? Like, we're never going to specify a language or an implementation style or anything like that, right? I will say, once you get past a certain level of diagnostic, though, it really gets harder to do this without like a target platform or a target operating system or something like that, though. I think in some ways we probably have already, standardized on Linux in some ways, whether we intended to or not, right? But we'll have to get there. I think the next logical thing is the input format. We do have one, but it is it's too complicated, right? Like, I don't think it's the one that I would want to try to make like an open standard.
Right. I think we can standardize input based on the tool or the feature under test. Like, for example, LMT, like now we have two variants. Probably when we meet, we can spend some time together and see if we can standardize the input so that underneath the work or the test hardness could be interchangeable and we can still use the same test runner or something.
I'm sorry, Daniel's had his hand up for a while, but I have a follow-up question on that.
No, go ahead. It's unrelated, so maybe we can close up.
My question would be, like, once we have an implementation and it's working well, what makes alternative implementations compelling? Why wouldn't we want to put all of our weight behind one reference that we do?
That's a good question. One thing I can think of is like doing A/B testing, like pros and cons of it. Like how does it behave under the same OCP test run? Just coming up with some random question, and also the duration, like how long. I mean, we can get all this information by various other means. You don't have to standardize anything before you even get to that point, but at least we can do an apples to apples comparison when we standardize.
Okay.
Well-
Yeah, I think we're let Daniel go after this, but I think we're already in a position where the next time we want to make a change to the format that's not trivial, we're already in a place where we have 2 implementations on the output. Like I don't think we are going to change it that frequently, to be honest, so it might not be a big deal, but we should be careful about locking down too much, right? Like Libre ultimatum, right? Like we want to keep everything as free as we can.
Sounds good.
And still be useful, right? Like that's an important part too, right? And still be interchangeable. Like you can't go too far down that route.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
Go ahead, Daniel.
No, I just wanted to follow up, Adrian, on the chats that we were having yesterday with the Havoc framework folks that are looking to develop some tests in the OCP format. And you mentioned their question on when you run on a cluster, what should the DUT be? And more generally, how much influence does a DUT have to have, or how many side effects on other DUTs before you consider the OCP DUT to be the whole cluster or a number of DUTs? But they also had some other questions that they raised that I think would be interesting to float to the team. So they mentioned about how to associate a software info to a hardware info. I don't know that we have in the software info a field that we can use to reference that software as belonging to one particular hardware. And I don't know if others have resolved that in some way, or if we should add that identifier field to the hardware info that the software info can then reference.
So Daniel, I had this question on my list as well, but we've jumped through a number of topics today, and I didn't want to confuse people with going too fast on any of them.
I know that the Havoc folks are working on that this week, so if we could give them some guidance,
okay,
might help them out on these.
Okay. So for context, what we have right now as a software info is an object which should describe any kind of software that runs on any piece of hardware which is relevant for the DIAG. So that could be kernel version or system software or firmware versions or whatnot. So the question that came up that Daniel just mentioned was, how do we actually say that this particular piece of hardware is running this particular firmware version?
Basically, how do we associate a software info to a particular hardware info? And I don't know if there's a clean way to do that today, or if we need to extend the spec.
I don't think there's going to be a binary answer to this one or a trivial answer. I think the scope, I mean, my take on that is when we think of what makes up a device under test, if it's actually a multi-node or a multi-memory domain system, the specificity of what each of those nodes is made up from a software perspective has to sort of set the domain of what qualifies the DUT. In other words, if, for example, a memory domain matters as a definition of the scope of that DUT, then it has to go by the list of everything that's encompassed by that memory domain. But I don't think there's a one answer to rule them all that can clarify this. But the most straightforward answer I would take is that it's going to be the aggregation of all the software that make up, say, a cluster or a multi-node system, unless there's a requirement that it be specified.
Let's say that in the example that you're giving of a cluster, let's say that different nodes in the cluster have different software. So how do you say each one of those software components is associated to this particular node in the cluster? You can have the hardware info relate all of the cluster nodes, and the software info have all of the, I don't know, kernel versions for all of the nodes, for example, for lack of a better. But how do you associate this node has this kernel version, that node has that kernel version.
So Daniel, we have like 4 minutes left, and I understand your goal here is to figure out an answer that we can use for the hackathon this week. So it's kind of time sensitive. I've been looking at the spec in the meantime, and I think as a quick solution right now, which should also be temporary, the DUT info has a metadata field. So software infos and hardware infos do not relate to each other right now in the spec, but there's a metadata field in the DUT info. So as a temporary solution, we can put the relationships in that metadata.
Okay. I'll relay that to the Havoc folks.
Go Dan.
For this particular use case that Daniel mentioned, wouldn't the computer system be the more appropriate field to use inside the hardware info and software info? That's what it was kind of for, is for multi-node systems.
Yeah, but it doesn't, it's not only at that level. Another question is, okay, I have multiple PCI cards and they have different firmware versions, but a PCI card is not a computer system.
Yeah, that one, I was actually thinking about that one as well. It seems straightforward to add the hardware ID to a software ID, but I need to think about that, right? Like there may be repercussions up the stream that we might screw up. So I would want to sleep on that for at least 4 hours.
That's why I'm saying we can't do this in 4 minutes or 2 minutes. And I thought of that as well in the meantime. And to me, it doesn't quite make sense mathematically because it's not a bijection. So not all softwares will map to all hardwares.
Yeah. No, it can be an optional field. It definitely should not be mandatory. They had one more question that hopefully is very trivial and we can quickly answer, which is all of this OCP output, where is it going? Does it go to standard out? But in that case, there might be tests that actually need user input, and so we can't sequester standard out for the OCP output. Or does it go to a named file, and do we know what that name is?
Could be
implementation dependent.
Yeah, could be either. This isn't mandated in the spec.
Okay,
and it could be stood there as well. So there's like some DAGs which say -o and to what file, or it depends on the DAG.
Okay. So I think that might be part of the input parameters, because right now we want to align, if we want to be able to run a diag anywhere, we need that executor to know where to find the output of the diag. So we need to standardize probably in some place to drop that output, but that might be specified in the input parameters. So that's pending.
Well, the simplest answer to this is on stood out, but then you said the executor needs to know how to interpret this or where the output is. But to me, this is in conflict with saying that the diag is interactive, because the executor is not an interactive environment.
Yeah, I mean, we can have both cases. We can have a diag that is interactive, and we can have other diags that are not interactive, and we should probably support both cases, right?
Yeah, again, it's implementation dependent, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, we're on time. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, real quick, Satish, you're going to send me your output, correct?
Yes, I will send my JSON output, and I will expect a whiteboarding session. So.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
All right, see you next week.